Hey gang, from the table on screen, you can see that we had a pretty interesting discussion last week, and it was very rich in both of the groups in terms of kind of what you agreed and disagreed with and what you wanted to learn more about. From the coloring on screen, I want to call your attention to the light blue text. Those are the only entries or summaries that I saw repeated, that more of you said, I agree, that's important, or I agree, I'd like to learn about that too. In some cases, you didn't say I agree, you were just posting. And I think that really shows the depth of the conversation, that we didn't have a lot of overlap, that each of you brings something unique to this class and has something unique in your context that lets you see things slightly differently. So let's break down kind of what played out in last week's conversation. Just kind of as a recap, I asked you, based off of the readings that you had, the book chapter and the different references I gave you, what was something that you agreed with, what was something that you disagreed with, and what was something that you wanted to learn more about. So over in the K-12 side of the house, thinking critically and the need to think critically, both as instructors and to empower our students to think critically, came up as an agreement. The other topic that came up was that of affordances, and I saw this, it was slightly repeated, but not so much in the same way, but wanting to know more about affordances and accessibility, which you can kind of see over in that Learn More column, and special education. The one thing that I think stood out across everybody's posts was this idea of pedagogy first. We all agree, we all know, yet we see that technology integration often fails, often because we didn't consider the pedagogy first. And that's where we have to think about how our voice as an instructor, as a current administrator or future administrator, can really help bring some levity to the conversation. The need for continued professional development, that you can't just let everything stay stagnant, that the skills we have need to be updated and transferred to new and adapting, whether it's a technique or processes or tools. So, kind of that whole area. Implementation plan, the need for an implementation plan. And I think you'll find it interesting because this showed up in both groups. It was mentioned both by K-12 and higher education industry that without a proper implementation plan, then we're going about it kind of backwards. Having alternatives, backup plans. We all know that tech is going to fail, and it's going to fail at the worst possible time. I mentioned this story in the K-12 discussion, but wanted to share it with everybody real quick. This last fall, I had perhaps one of the most interesting and useful unplanned lessons. I was trying to do a Google Hangout with a colleague up in Montana in my undergraduate class on campus here at UW, and my MacBook battery apparently was going bad, and I didn't know this. My battery was at 90%. I thought it was fine, and my computer shut down. And so I got my computer back up. And keep in mind, we had been in this Google Hangout for 10 minutes between my friend in Montana and this class of undergraduates when it shut down. So it was okay, get the computer booted back up. When it immediately shut down again, I realized that my computer wasn't going to be a viable option. I typically bring an iPad mini to class. I use the app Class Dojo for students to tap in for attendance, and then I can pull the attendance report at the end of the semester to help me with participation grade reduction points if someone has excessively missed class. So I grabbed my iPad off of the table where the students had previously used it and connected it to Google Hangouts. And I called my friend again and I apologized. I told her about the problem. She understood completely, being a tech integration specialist for a school, and she was hanging in there with me while we tried to work out the issues. I couldn't get the Apple TV in the room, AirPlay, to work correctly. I wound up running across the hall to the other lab where we also have equipment for checkout to get an adapter so that I could connect the iPad to the projector in the room, which wound up working. And I was able to plug in the room sound system into the 3.5 millimeter jack, and then I could relay questions from the students to the Hangout. But this way the students could see my friend on the screen up at the front of the room, and we could continue with this little exercise. Unfortunately, I went through probably 3 contingency plans in that process. So you have to have alternatives waiting in the wings or be able to troubleshoot and think on the fly. And then there was the agreement on features versus tools. And sometimes we don't always consider that maybe it's not necessarily the tool that we're looking at, but a specific feature of that tool. Some great conversations. Under disagreement, you can see that I have stars next to two of these. First up was the ISTE standards, and the star is to designate not so much that the person disagrees with the standards, but isn't as familiar with how they're used in classrooms, how they're integrated, and there was even some conversation about differentiation between grade levels and if that should happen and what that should look like. The needs assessment asterisk on screen isn't so much that the person disagrees that you need to have a needs assessment, but that it's not seen often. And this is absolutely true of instructional design as a field. Too many times we skip that needs assessment part of the process, and that's huge. It can be incredibly detrimental to the overall plan. Moving into the wanting to learn more category, media literacy came up and wanting to learn more about teaching media literacy. This is where I refer folks to Common Sense Media and their certification program. Even if you don't want to get certified, Common Sense Media has some great resources for teachers to help you with thinking about how to select different apps. I haven't seen something as common at the adult level. I think perhaps that could be an area of interest if somebody wanted to pursue it, actually. If you've spent any time on social media in the last day, if not 10 years, then you'll see a distinct lack of media literacy among adult users of internet technologies. So that could be interesting for someone to take a look at. Accessibility, wanting to know more about accessibility, you should check out UW Echo at the Wind and Water Center. They do a lot of great work over there in terms of accessibility and technologies. Granted, they are focused more on adult learners, but you can get some great information about K-12 too, as they do work with our special education folks. Games and sims was brought up repeatedly. Games and simulations are great as a tool, as long as you have some ideas on what you're doing. There are all kinds of resources out there related to this. If you'd like some of the research on it, I have a bit of it, but you can always do a quick Google Scholar search or search the UW libraries to get more. Anything by James G. in this area will be fantastic for you to take a look at. ISTE standards came up under wanting to learn more as well. I do promise that when I'm at the ISTE conference in another 2-ish weeks or so, 3-ish weeks, I will bring back any updated information I get there, but I also shared the link in the K-12 discussion so that you can go keep up with what's happening on the website. And then the other thing that was mentioned is the forthcoming Department of Education app to help with selecting apps based off of your context. I think that this is a fantastic project. I did dig deeper into this since it was brought up and discovered that the app is supposed to be released in early 2017. I have not seen any updates since about March of this year, so we're going on about 3 months or so with that in mind. But I do promise, I make this promise to you now, once I hear any update or if I see the app come out in 2017, I will come back to this course shell so I can look up everybody who was in the class and look at the K-12 group, or if you're interested from higher ed and industry as well, let me know. And I will disseminate that information when the app comes out. Over in the higher ed industry conversation, it was a really good conversation in terms of the disagreement, which you see the one light blue entry. But first up, the agreeances. So the 4 abilities model came up as something that one of our classmates agrees with, something that he's seen in his years of designing training and working with adult learners. Critical needs, and that list of critical needs including feedback, flexibility, and what was the other one again? I should have that list right in front of me. Expectations. Managing expectations and setting expectations. Those critical needs were agreed with by many of the classmates that we have in the higher ed group. The idea that schools have become a place for how to learn versus what to learn is something that was agreed with. Having an implementation plan, I mentioned that earlier. And then failure to reach potential was something that came up in terms of we sometimes don't allow or technologies are not able to reach a full potential. If you're not familiar with it, especially as a higher ed industry trainer, developer, administrator, instructor, take a look at the hype curve. When I was first introduced to it, it was called Gartner's S-curve of adoption, where you can see kind of when a new tool or technology is launched, what happens with the hype that builds, the trough of disillusionment as we think, well, this isn't the savior, it's not going to solve all of our problems, and then as the trend flattens out into sustainable use. Very interesting work, and if you have not yet taken ITEC 5550, you'll cover kind of similar ideas on how reaching potential plays out. Last but not least, agreeing with some way to grant prior credit, or at least having credits more easily transferable amongst institutions. Under what was disagreed with, I'll save the learning for life for last, and we'll move down to the computer lab layout. I think there was a great point made about how we try to mitigate certain issues through design and layout, yet those issues will likely persist regardless of that effort. So that was an interesting conversation. The competency-based education side of prior credit came up. And if the intent of education is to help further our skills, then what is the benefit to competency-based credit? And there's some interesting conversations around CBE. For our adult higher ed learner administrators, instructors, there is a really great resource out there that's called Evolution with 3 L's. So EVOLLLUTION. There's all kinds of great articles that are written and published and shared through this particular outlet. I remember reading it, years ago, probably when it was starting up, and have since had a number of colleagues post and publish articles on this website and this outlet. So it might be interesting for you to take a look at some of the CBE conversations that have unfolded there, or just some general adult education topics related to technology. Considering the process came up, and that we don't often consider the process, and we need to. The idea that validation is not critical. I thought that was an interesting conversation. The role of big data in prescribing learner activities came up as something that someone disagreed with. And then also kind of not considering our different contexts. So some nice overall rounded conversations. What the higher ed and industry folks wanted to learn more about included Poll Everywhere. If you do not have access to Poll Everywhere, let me know and I can work with you. UW can help you in that respect. Google Drive. Obviously, with week 3 topic, you will get more into Google Drive, so I'll save some resources until later. The use of and role of mobile devices in the classroom. This came up more than once, but from 2 different perspectives, and I thought that was interesting. In one case, someone wanted to learn more about good use of mobile devices in the classroom. In the other case, the person wanted to see evidence of effective use because he's only seen disruptive use thus far. And let me tell you, there's lots of evidence out there related to this particular topic. Go back to why you select a technology. Mobile devices are the same. You have to ask the same questions. You have to provide directed guidance, or it's all for nothing. The other thing that came up about wanting to learn more was that of degree alignment and how we closely align degrees and careers. You see this very often with trade schools, and it has definitely crept into higher education. What was once seen as more professional preparation beyond the bachelor's degree, you now see more heavily at the bachelor's degree. So there's a lot of resources out there related to this as well. The technology integration, specifically for adult learners, and what are the current surveys happening in this area? That was something that came up. And then the digital divide between teachers and students. And I posted a response there that kind of talked about what I'm seeing as an instructor in higher ed and how I encounter and talk to younger peers and colleagues who refuse to use technology for one reason or another. So what I plan to do over the next 3 to 4 weeks, because the semester for summer is quick, is try to provide you with resources over time that answer this learn more. I also want to encourage you to take your learn more and apply that to your paper that is due this week. See if you can find a way to connect what it was you wanted to learn more about into your paper and your position on technology integration. That's my challenge for you. Thank you guys for a great conversation. So let's take a look at what's on deck for this week. Use the on-screen links to navigate to the section of the overview you wish to access.